Hey everyone, this is Danny Porter. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining my session to Apple ID or not to Apple ID. I'm a partner development manager here at Jamf, and I get to work with app solutions and create integrations that help organizations be successful with all of the third-party connections that we work with at Jamf. For our session to Apple ID or not to Apple ID, I thought it was appropriate to say, hey, that is the question. It's a great question to ask. If you're new to deploying Apple devices, or you've been deploying devices since even before Apple even had an MDM framework. So let's talk about what an Apple ID is. Let's talk through what we're going to discuss today during this session. What is an Apple ID? How do we use an Apple ID successfully in our organizations? How do we apply those Apple IDs? I think there's 3 areas that we can really apply Apple IDs in our organizations. And as always, it's fun to think ahead. So what would be the future of Apple IDs? How do we continue to utilize the tools that Apple has given us to be successful and even use Apple IDs in our organization? So first and foremost, what is an Apple ID? And Apple's great because they help us by giving us definitions of these titles, these topics, these sayings. So from Apple support specifically, they have shared with us that an Apple ID is your personal account for the entire Apple universe. That's helpful. Now, as we think about utilizing personal Apple IDs in business cases, it's helpful to know that an Apple ID is your personal account. And if maybe you missed that or you don't quite see that underlined yet, right? Just want to maybe emphasize that an Apple ID is personal. It's individual. It's not for business, right? So if you're utilizing personal Apple IDs for a business process, because, well, that's what you thought you always had to do, or that's what you've always been doing, or you just simply don't know there's another way. I'm here to tell you, and I hope it's helpful and gives you a breath of fresh air, is yes, there is a better way. If that's you using personal Apple IDs for business use cases, there's a better way. And that's what we're going to hear to talk about today. Now, when we're utilizing personal Apple IDs in a business use case, there's a couple challenges that you might be experiencing, or excuse me, maybe not you, right? It's the other businesses that aren't on this call today, but right, they'll listen to it later, right? So challenges that they might come across. First and foremost, they have challenges around app updates. How do I keep my apps up to date? Is it auto updated? Do I need to put in my Apple ID password every time? What about personal information from my photos, my contacts, my reminders, the pictures of my kids that I've had on my iPhone for the last 9 years, right? Communication, thinking of iMessage. And as you can see on the screen, the beautiful or dreadful, whichever side of the coin you've been on, activation lock. What happens when I'm locked out of my device, and how can I get back into my corporate owned device? And then lastly, other Apple services. Now remember, the personal Apple ID is a personal account to the entire Apple universe. And as Apple continues to grow into that, they're showing some ideas around how to use Apple iCloud, Apple Music, Apple Fitness, etc. So what are some companies choosing to use instead? And one of them, as you can see on the screen, is using business emails. Now, in some ways, this helps save some time and solve some of our problems. Because again, we need to make sure that we don't have activation lock. We need to be able to use our business devices when that individual leaves. So when we have password changes, what about saving ourselves from activation lock? That's a great tool. However, I always want to ask the question, where's the Excel spreadsheet that keeps track of all the Apple IDs in your organization? And what birthday do you use? Because an Apple ID asks you to set up your birthday. So put that in the chat. What birthdays do you put in if you're using business emails for personal Apple IDs? And then lastly, if an individual sets up 2-step authentication, that can cause you some problems. What if that phone number goes with the individual when they leave the organization, or does the IT person use it for their own, right? So there's lots of challenges if you're choosing to use business emails as Apple IDs. And if you want to use other tools that we'll talk about here in the future, business Apple IDs need to be having business emails, not personal Apple IDs with business emails. So we'll talk about that. If that's you, this session is a great one to attend because, hey, we're going to help solve this problem. The other solution that I've seen other organizations use is one Apple ID to rule them all. You can imagine, if you're familiar with Apple services, what challenges this could cause you and the rest of the organization, whether you're a company of 20, 100, 10,000. Are we using one Apple ID on all? Here's some challenges that you might experience. iMessage syncs across all devices with the same Apple ID. Could you imagine what it would look like if one person texted on iMessage and it went to the CEO and the support guy and the janitor and everyone else that gets a corporate owned device, whatever that might look like? Not a good situation. And yes, those are personal examples that I've seen of organizations where a CEO did get a text message through iMessage from his wife that had the Apple ID tied to all other sales and support team in the organization. How do we make sure photos, right? If one person deletes one photo on one phone, it's deleted on all the phones. Contacts are the same. FaceTime calls. And then lastly, when there's a password change, everybody needs to put in that new password. So are you planning that? How has that caused you problems? It can completely lock you out of using these tools that help you and your teams be successful. So let's solve these by saying, let's not do these two options. No business emails for personal Apple IDs and no one Apple ID to rule them all. So when we use an Apple ID though, what are the things we're wanting to accomplish? Why do we use Apple IDs in an organization? And some of these you might be familiar with. When I use an Apple ID, I need to get applications on my device. How do I get them without an Apple ID? I get them from the App Store, put in my password, they download. Personal information using iMessage and FaceTime rather than SMS messaging. Hey, the problem is sometimes we lose our devices, so we've got to use Find My iPhone or the Find My app on our devices. Do we use that app to find our devices? Or are we trying to find them with our employees, right? Again, not you, other companies, right? Other examples. And then lastly, some other challenges or uses of an Apple ID is an iCloud backup. How do we make sure that this device that we started with, and now we're refreshing because we're moving on from the iPhone 5C to the iPhone 12, how do we make sure that that comes across, right? So we need iCloud backups. And here are some tips I think that can be really helpful for us and helpful for you when you're thinking through that. Because to your point, we've got to check all of these circles, not boxes. We're checking circles today. So what are some solutions and ways to help you with that? And first and foremost, Apple has given you the tools to help lay the framework for you to be successful with that. And these two tools are called Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. If you are unfamiliar with these tools, these platforms, these portals from Apple, I highly encourage you to take a moment and look into them. First and foremost, they're free from Apple. And so they want you to use them and be successful and take advantage of the framework that these provide you to be using Apple devices in a business use case without having to use personal processes and personal tools to solve business problems. So if you have questions about that, we have done more information on them. We've done some webinars, so feel free to take a screenshot, to scan that QR code. It'll take you right to those webinars that we've hosted on our website around what is Apple Business Manager and what is Apple School Manager for those of you in the education vertical, using them for students, higher ed, teachers, etc., however you're using them. An Apple Business Manager, I would say, unlocks the benefits, the goodness, if you will, of tools to help IT, office managers, the person who has to manage the Apple devices because you didn't get to opt out because you missed the meeting, whatever your use case is that you're saying, hey, I'm managing Apple devices in our organization, it unlocks the tools for device management, right? Jamf, mobile device management tool, helping you automate and simplify, streamline the deployment, the management, and securing of your Apple devices. And here's just a handful of some of those benefits of utilizing the tools that's provided to you because you're using Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. First and foremost, right? Hey, I need to get apps on. Great. What if you did not have to use an Apple ID and you could assign apps to your device? Nobody having to say yes, okay, or put in an Apple ID password. And by the way, they stay up to date because that's what we do. We help you automate and solve these issues. If you're trying to find lost devices because you're concerned that your employees might leave them at different places, maybe they're traveling, whatever's going on, we provide you the location of those devices, not to track your users, but to track your devices and keep them safe and secure. And then lastly, activation lock. If you don't know what that term is, it's that one time when the Apple ID wasn't signed out of your employee's device and they left the organization and that device is still living in the front drawer of your desk at your office, right? It's the drawer full of bricked phones, right? It's that what's going on. And so with that, we want to help solve that. MDM can help you remove those Apple IDs when they become activation lock. So using personal Apple IDs for business use cases is not working. There are tools to help you be successful using the framework provided from Apple in Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager. Using a tool like Jamf for mobile device management allows you to take advantage of all the benefits and strategies and tools that you need in order to be successful with deploying Apple apps, security, deployment, software updates, redeploying devices, all of those tools and steps that you take every single day in your organization. And I would say, how do we now apply Apple IDs? I would say there are 3 areas that we can apply Apple IDs in an organization. First and foremost, we think about utilizing personal Apple IDs. Now, you just said, hey, don't use personal Apple IDs. What I'm saying is don't use personal Apple IDs for business processes. Let your end user take advantage of personal Apple IDs on business-owned devices. Some of you might say, no, I don't need to do that. We'll talk about that. Managed Apple IDs. It's a tool that's available within Apple Business Manager and Apple School Manager for students and for teachers, for employees, to automate a lot of your processes. Or some of you are saying, hey, I don't want to deal with Apple IDs. I don't need them. Great, let's talk about some situations and scenarios that's what would best serve you in your organization. So first, we'll start with personal Apple IDs. Now, you can allow your end users to put on personal Apple IDs on business-owned devices because you've set the framework and the foundation within Apple Business Manager and device management with Jamf. And then if you're allowing your team to use other Apple devices, maybe you have a Mac Choice program, maybe they have iPads for their sales team, maybe they have an iPhone, an iPad, and a Mac, whatever your situation might be, want to help you take advantage of the features that are enabled because of personal Apple IDs. And here's just a handful of them. Some of my favorite is Universal Clipboard. I can copy something from my Mac and paste it onto my phone, or vice versa. I can type something on my phone when I'm not at my desk. I can get to my desk and I can copy and paste right from my iPhone right to my Mac. I can use handoff, start a note and pick it up on my Mac. Backups, photos are all secured and saved across all of my devices. And then personal information. So that way, if I have a business contact, it shows up when I pick up my phone because my phone can ring through my Mac or through my iPad, and I know who that person is that's calling me. Some really great tools to help people take advantage of productivity within the Apple ecosystem. So allow them to use that by giving them the opportunity to use personal Apple IDs, so that way they can keep that business separate from personal and definitely keep personal out of business, right? Okay, so we've talked about some use cases in applying personal Apple IDs. What's really great is that you can also use managed Apple IDs. Now, this is very different from a personal Apple ID. And so, per Apple, I'm so grateful again, definitions are helpful. So, what is a managed Apple ID? A managed Apple ID are accounts designed specifically for businesses and schools that enable access to key Apple services. Now, this is very different from a personal Apple ID. Remember, an Apple ID was a personal account to the entire Apple ecosystem or universe, right? The whole kit and caboodle, everything you need is accessible through the Apple ID. But a managed Apple ID does not. It gives you access to key Apple services that are helpful for you in whatever situation you need for your employees and for your students. It's also designed specifically for you. So, what could some of those benefits be? One right away that I can think about is federation. With Microsoft Azure AD, you can have your managed Apple IDs federated to your Active Directory and allowing that to be the login for Apple services. And yes, personal Apple IDs and managed Apple IDs can live on the same device. You can actually have multiple managed Apple IDs on one device. I don't know why you would do that, but hey, maybe that is what you need. And so you can allow business Apple IDs to live alongside personal Apple IDs to give access to things like contacts and calendars. And with iOS 15, iCloud Drive, iWork collaboration, working on a keynote or a Pages document together. And if you're using BYOD, if you're bringing personally owned devices into your mobile device management tool, managed Apple IDs can give access and authentication to that enrollment process. So that way you can assign business owned apps to personally owned devices and have them managed. And it still gives the freedom for that end user to remove that if they need to. Now, that's for commercial customers, that's for business customers. For those of you in education, managed Apple IDs have been around for a long time. You can use tools like iWork collaboration, iCloud Drive, Photos, Safari, Notes, News, Calendar, Reminders, iCloud backups. So grateful for that as students. And a student gets 200 gigabytes of free iCloud storage. That's fantastic. And that helps them with the tools and skills that they need to grow and develop as they continue to use technology in their environment with their projects. Something that's unique to the Apple School Manager platform and managed Apple IDs for education is the accessibility and use of FaceTime and iMessage. You can enable your students to use iMessage and FaceTime in the school setting for collaboration, for joint messaging, for presentations. Students can connect with teachers. Teachers can connect with students. And with iOS 15, there's FaceTime screen sharing. So many great things are continuing to come when you use managed Apple IDs for schools and businesses that it's helpful to get started now and see some of these benefits. For both business and education, you can use managed Apple IDs to create shared user device experience. What does that mean? That means that you can have 10 or 20 different users on one iPad that then sign in, just like they would with their Mac, with a managed Apple ID. It's an Apple native experience. It's both for business and education. It keeps keychain support for passwords. Thank you. Right? It has guest mode. And it requires a managed Apple ID, which again is all created in those Apple portals and platforms. Now, I have to drop this in there because this is helpful. If you're wanting to explore shared iPad or shared iPhone experiences, also encourage you to look into Jamf Setup with single login, Jamf Setup, Jamf Reset. There are some other sessions about this at JNUC that I would highly encourage you to check into. One of which a couple you can see on the screen here: single sign-on for enterprise, single login for developers. If you're wanting to create a shared experience with logins that connect maybe to an IDP, maybe check out that session. We'd love to talk with you more about that solution. So, managed Apple IDs, personal Apple IDs, and then there's the other person on the call that says, I'm done with Apple IDs. I actually don't want to use them. And hey, I get you. I see you. Yes, you don't have to use Apple IDs at all. Maybe your answer to Apple ID or not to Apple ID is no, I don't want to use Apple IDs. And here's some of the use cases that might be applicable to you or other areas of your organization. Shift workers. This device stays at the office. It's for the manufacturing floor. It is for the students at the library. It's a shared device, but I don't need anybody to sign into it. Cool. You don't have to use Apple IDs. You can use devices and iPads as a kiosk. You can deploy Apple TVs with the right app at the right time without needing to sign in. Again, using it as a library checkout or a business-only device. You do not have to use an Apple ID. That is an option, and so many organizations choose to use that as well. So you need the tools to help you get there, which all come in with, again, the foundation. Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, and an MDM that can support you with all of those features. So let's look ahead. Why would this be helpful for me in the future? We've talked about why it's helpful maybe for me in the past because I've used business emails. Again, not you, other organizations, as well as what can I do now? But what's coming in the future? How is Apple continuing to position themselves around using managed Apple IDs for the success in enterprise and in education? And if you didn't catch Apple's WWDC session around Discover Account-Driven User Enrollment, highly encourage you, bookmark it. Check it out. There's some really cool features that have come out with iOS 15 and are continuing to come out with future iterations and implementations of this new technology that will help you utilize BYOD devices, corporate-owned devices, and utilize tools that take advantage of managed Apple IDs. And here's maybe some of my own dreaming. What could this potentially and possibly look like? I look at what's available for schools and I say, what if managed Apple IDs for business could provide storage? iOS 15 is going to start allowing iCloud Drive, FaceTime and iMessage across managed business Apple IDs. What would that mean for us as IT people that need to share the screen to say, just click on the button in front of you? I see it. It's gray with a gear on it. Can we share that with our users to help them be successful? What about in the future if there's an integration with identity providers? Apple has integrated Apple School Manager with student information systems to help students and schools and IT deploy Apple devices. And then there's some great partners like Claris. They have a product called Claris Connect that allows you to automate some functionality around managed Apple IDs for schools and businesses with other third-party applications and processes. This is going to be helpful to think about where are Apple IDs going in the future, because Apple is continuing to innovate and grow and utilize them for the success of you and other students and other schools as well. So what can we get from this? I would say, hey, take the time to start thinking through this question today. Are you going to Apple ID or are you not? Are you using business Apple IDs? Are you using business emails for personal Apple IDs? Don't. Start today to start refreshing those out. As you refresh devices, go through the process to move away from using personal Apple IDs in a business use case, because there's new functionality, new tools that are going to continue to come out from Apple that you're going to want to take advantage of. And we want to help you be successful both now and in the future. So that's all we had for today, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and attending my session to Apple ID or not to Apple ID. I hope this has been helpful. And I hope you have a great rest of your JNUC. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Take care, everyone.